Hello, good evening from London. And today I'm going to be talking about the first budget from Labour in over 14 years. And a lot of people, of course, have been nervous about this budget, especially those property investors and landlords who we speak to on a day-to-day basis. Now, what we do know is that there was a lot of scaremongering happening at the very beginning of all this process. And it's just interesting to find out as to what governments were wanting to push through, but also just organizations that were really rooting for renters, but also on the opposite of that, organizations that were really pushing for the advantages for property investors and agents and so forth. But let's dive into as to what these organizations actually requesting. Let's start with the Property Mark. So Property Mark initially had sent this letter across to a Labour, and it's interesting because you can look at this and you think, really, was this just wishful thinking, or did they really thought they had the chance of pushing any of this across? So Property Mark had prepared a deliverable and achievable spending commitments that will increase the supply of privately rented accommodation. So this was in the best interest of not only just landlords and agents, but it was also in the best interest of renters, according to Property Mark, of course. And we had a reform of stamp duty, land tax, and this is something that the government, the Property Mark, wanted to push. So we're concerned about reports that Chancellor Reeves MP may lower the stamp duty land tax threshold for first-time buyers to continue to support people onto the housing ladder, and the threshold of 425,000 should remain, along with the 5% rate for properties of up to £925,000. As we know now, of course, is that none of us really anticipated that the government was going to try to, I would say, penalise landlords and investors in the front end. There was a lot of talk about the capital gain tax, and that it was going to increase, and what exactly they were going to be doing for landlords that were exiting. The funny thing is that we didn't really hear much about stamp duty. None of us, it was almost like we were blindsided as to this could be a possibility. At least I didn't hear any conversations from landlords talking about that point of view. And all along, Labour had this plan, of course, with the stamp duty. As you may know, it's from 3% gone up to 5%. That's a 2% increase. And that's going to be quite painful, of course. And depending on what region of the UK you may be, as a landlord or an investor looking to expand your property portfolio, and also for those people, or those buyers at least, who are already in the process of buying a property and waiting to exchange and to complete. Now suddenly you're stuck with a big bill. I'm going to break down what's happened so far, and then we can jump into, again, what was proposed. But one of those big things is going to be that stamp duty increase for second homes. So let's dive into this one here. So budget aims to unlock housing investment with affordable homes. So this is from Property Mark, and this is what has happened so far. Okay, so what we have is Reeves has committed $5 billion to deliver the UK government's housing plan, which includes increasing the affordable homes programme. So we've got taxation, we've got business rates. The Labour Party made the long-term election promise to abolish business rates, but the Treasury cannot afford to lose the $30 billion granted by the tax just yet. So instead, the current 75% discount business rates, which is due to expire in April 2025, is replaced by a discount of 40%. Now, this is, of course, a stamp duty that I was just sharing with you. So this has increased from 3% to 5%. And this is just overnight. So from the 31st of October 2024. Here's the punchline, because a lot of people have been asking me about, what happens if you're already in the process? Will you be exempt, and will you have an opportunity? I'm going to break this down because I am part of an investor group here, and they've broken this down very clear as to what this means. So I have it here. So the government is supporting first-time buyers and main home buyers by increasing the higher rates for additional dwellings of stamp duty land tax from 3% to 5%. These higher rates apply to purchase of second homes by to-let residential properties and companies purchase residential property And the increase will provide lock-in. Okay, so here is the time frame. This is expected to result in 130,000. So those who exchange contracts prior to the 31st of October 2024 are not affected by these rate change. So again, those who exchange contracts prior to the 31st. So if you have not exchanged by midnight tonight, unfortunately, if it is a second home, you will be paying a 5% increase. And what does that look like? I mean, we talk about 3% and 5%, but what does that actually look like? Let's have a look in real terms. And we'll use as an example, if you're here in London, in the capital, and you're looking at a property of, let's say, £500,000, well, that's going to be probably the average, especially when you're looking at central London. What you will paying for is £27,500. Now, this is at a rate of 5.50%. Now, if this had been, let's look at it from a £400,000 because it's below the £500,000 threshold, which makes it easier. So this, in fact, would have been something in the region of, let's have a look here. So 400,000 times. This would be in something in the region of around £12,000. By up to today. Now it's £20,000. So that's an extra £8,000 that an investor or buyer of a second home will have to now dig into their pockets and find to be able to pay for this. And what are the consequences of this? I've been discussing and sharing this with some investors, and there are several things that may happen with this. Now, number one would be that the buyers at this point of time are probably going to go back to those sellers and say, hey, I wasn't taking into consideration having to put my hand in my pocket and dig out another £8,000 or £20,000, whatever that may be. Because remember, in London, those properties are going to be so much more expensive, and therefore that stamp duty is going to be so much higher. So you can see people having to look for an extra £20,000-40,000 to be able to cover this tax. And we do anticipate quite a few properties, quite a few deals falling through, unfortunately, at the back of this. Now, what the government says is that this is a good thing potentially, because this is going to mean that there's going to be more properties available for those first-time buyers. But the thing is that we know that most of the properties that are on the market for rental, not a big percentage of those don't necessarily go to first-time buyers. This could be for different factors, but one of the biggest factors that I understand is that they are smaller homes and don't really house bigger families or people who actually want to buy homes. They want those bigger spaces, but also maybe it's just the affordability, and also the fact that these properties may not be in the location where first-time buyers are looking to purchase their homes. So I want to make sure that you can hear me. The fact that I have Stephen James here saying that this is really scary, I'm going to assume that you can. Danny, could capital gains or inheritance tax specifically impact property investors? And if so, how might smaller landlords manage? Well, the thing is with this one, Stephen, is like, for example, the Section 24, which was announced back in 2016, and of course it was phased in between 2017 to 2020, and now that's been removed and just replaced by a 20%, and it's capped. Very different to this. You can maneuver with this, and there was things that you can do to be able to mitigate this, like incorporating. So you were able to do things to be able to keep that cost down. With this, unfortunately, there is nothing you can do as an investor. So the way that I can see this impacting, of course, is those property investors who were planning on expanding are probably going to put that on hold, or they're going to see how those numbers work. And the only way those numbers can work is, of course, if those rents, increase, and therefore making it worth their while. My hunch is that most property investors, at least those professional property investors, they will make it work in the same way that if you have a business and, for example, the national insurance that has increased, which is also going to impact those businesses, are they just going to close up shop? No, they will do what they need to do to adapt and adjust. And of course, that doesn't always work out, but they will certainly try their very best. And most property investors out there, they're quite savvy and they're going to see how that's going to work. I hope that helps, but I definitely see that the expansion and people expanding is definitely going to slow down the process. Okay, we have another question here from Andrew. What do you think is this budget making you rethink investment strategies, or are you planning to hold steady? So I think this is going to accelerate a trend that we're already seeing, which is properties are the barrier to entry to property is much more higher in the capital, in the southeast, than it is in the north. And we already see that up in the north, more property investors are looking to increase their portfolio in this particular region. And I think at the back of the stamp duty increasing, that's just going to continue to accelerate that, because it was at the back of the first stamp duty increase and that surcharge being implemented by the Conservatives. And of course, this was George Osborne era. It was at the back of that that we started to see this trend of property investors looking in the north and in the Midlands. And I think that's going to continue moving forward. In fact, if we look at an article that I had here with regards to incorporation, we can see that trend that has continued. And if we look at where they continue to buy properties, it is within this region. So hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. But if you look at this, we have this article that is the number of limited companies set up by landlords at record levels. So limited companies are now a new normal for UK landlords, with over 46,000 companies set up between January and September 2024, a year-on-year rise of 23% and more than the total of 2021, according to Hamptons. Okay, so why is this important? Because going back to the government announcement today, what we can also see is what they've done with regards to capital gains tax is they have increased that for the higher rate, at least between 18 to 24%. And if you think about this logically, it makes sense that this was a good move from the government from the perspective of getting money from property investors, because as that article suggests, more and more investors have moved their property and holding their properties as a limited company. Now, if they sell, obviously they're going to have to sell shares. And that's where the government, of course, is looking to get that more increase, more money to be able to fill in that gap and that deficit that they have. So I'd like to look at this a little bit more in detail in terms of what the government has announced. So if we look at the inheritance tax, Reeves extended the inheritance tax threshold freeze for a further 2 years to 2030. So that means that the first £325,000 of any estate to be inherited tax-free, rising to £500,000 if the estate includes a residence passed direct to the descendants. So what does that mean? My understanding is your children or your grandchildren. And then £1 million when that tax-free allowance is passed on to a surviving spouse or civil partner, of course, someone who's living in the same residence. And then Property Mark advocates for revising inheritance tax thresholds, which have remained unchanged since 2009. So national insurance minimum wage. So this is the part that really is the sticky one, especially when you have those businesses. And I heard a lot of tech businesses saying out there, if the government hits us too hard, we'll simply get up and move. And of course, not every business has the luxury to do that, but we do know that these tech businesses are large and they are, I'd say, adaptable, and they have the luxury to do that. But whether this is something that's going to sort of throw them on the other side of the fence, I don't know. But this is huge. So to support small businesses with these changes, employment allowance. Let me read this. So the national insurance contributions by employers will rise from 13.8% to 15%, and the threshold at to which business start paying national insurance on a worker's earnings will be lowered from 9,000 to 5,000. So you've got a double whammy there, of course. So you've got an increase in percentage and that threshold going down. So to support small businesses with these changes, the employment allowance will rise from 5,000 to 10,500 pounds, and the £100,000 threshold will be removed, allowing more business to claim back from the bill. The Chancellor stated that this means that 865,000 employers will pay no national insurance next year, and a further million will pay the same as they did previously. Leave me a comment below to let me know what you think about that. So I want to jump in and, of course, just give an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions with regards to this. So we've got here by Sonia F. Good to have you online. And we have, how much of an impact do you think this budget might have on property prices and rental yields? Well, when it comes to property prices, Sonia, I think it's going to have a negative impact, if I'm quite frank, because I know that quite a few landlords out there are the ones who have their property on the market. In fact, what I do know is Rightmove put a report out there not too long ago stating that 18% of properties on the market right now for sale were previously rented properties. And if we drill down into that even further, what we do know is London, the capital, was even higher, was at 29%. That's almost a third of properties for sale were previously rented properties here. So that's a big chunk. Now, a lot of those properties were going towards those second home buyers still. So a lot of landlords will continue to buy those properties. I think that's going to come to a hold now. At least a substantial amount, and I think those properties are going to linger. That's what I think is going to happen. But also potentially those landlords who don't get what they want, and if the property, if this is my theory is correct, and property prices do start to stale a little bit, then I believe that ultimately a lot of landlords will decide, well, you know what, I'm just going to stay put then. I'm not going to sell my property. And this means that there will be more rental properties on the market, which I guess would be a good thing for renters. Let's see how that plays out. Okay, we have another one from Leslie. We as investors are really worried with these new changes. Are there any new government grants on energy efficiency schemes landlords should be keeping an eye out for? I believe there are, Leslie, and we'll dive into that because I have an article to share with that. So just bear with me with regard to that question. So we've got more monkey business. If you remortgage a property, you don't pay tax on what you take out. Okay. Not sure if that was a question. No. So, Kaylee, Danny, what are Labour government's focus on housing? What new regulations might landlords need to watch out for? Danny, with Labour government focusing on housing, what new regulation might landlords need to watch out for? I mean, for regards to regulations, my best advice, Kaylee, would be to look at other videos, just because right now we are looking at the budget right now rather than the overall regulations. But certainly subscribe to the channel, have a look at those videos with regards to the regulation. But there are a bunch when it comes to those renters' rights bill. But my biggest thing, I guess, if you had anything to take away from this, it would be with regards to Section 21 to keep an eye on, which is obviously going to be abolished very, very soon. Thank you, Katie. Much appreciated. So next up is going to be an article by Landlord Property Eye, actually. And let me have a look here. Actually, let's continue looking at what Generation Rent actually wanted the government to implement and what actually was implemented in comparison. Let's have a look here. So this is what Generation Rent actually wanted from the government. So in a lengthy statement to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves this afternoon budget, the group says landlords who don't have mortgage to pay a lower tax rate on their rental profits than someone in the same tax bracket who only has an income of their job. This is because wages are subject to national insurance. So requiring landlords to pay NI contributions would restore some balance with workers. Though, if this is announced, expect grumbling from landlords with mortgages who have had some tax relief withdrawn on the interest payments. So, again, these are things that Generation Rent was actually would have liked to have seen, and none of this happened. So, the five other demands are energy improvement grants to come to tenants, not landlords. Again, this is what Generation Rent actually wanted. Replace council tax and stamp duty with an annual property tax based on a proportion of the property's value, requiring reassessment of the nation's house values. This is an interesting proposal that I had, because I know this is certainly the system in quite a few countries across the world, especially in South America. This is how the council tax actually works. So I can only assume that this is where they've taken this system which they've proposed. Hammer more second homes with higher council tax. It says council in Wales now have greater powers to charge additional council tax, build genuinely affordable homes. So when we look at this, and this is something I was sharing with in a conversation this afternoon, which is at the beginning of this whole budget, a lot of people were really scared and really nervous. This budget is going to be painful. These were the words of our Prime Minister. And I believe this was a tactic, and, so I've been told, whereby, you propose or you anticipate something's going to be really bad. And then it's bad, but not as bad. And it makes it kind of okay after you feel that the worst didn't come. And I guess that's why I've shared with you that particular article where it talks about, council tax being hiked, landlords paying for national insurance, and all of these things. And I think that could be true. That there was this hype, and there was this scaremongering, and therefore, when the real budget came out, it's almost okay. We actually got lucky; it's not that bad. How do you feel if you're a landlord investor? I'll be very curious to find out what your thoughts are on the budget. So let's have a look here by Jonathan. Jonathan, I believe that the budget signals that the current stamp duty relief for first-time buyers might end in March 2025. I am planning to buy my first home next year. So how will it affect me? Okay. That is a good question, Jonathan, and I'm afraid I won't be the best person to answer that for you, because I'm not up to date with regards to first-time buyers. But certainly, if you message me, I'd be more than happy to get that information from you for you, or perhaps even put you through to the right agent that can help you. One thing that we do is we have great agents across the UK that will be able to assist you with that. I hope that helps, Jonathan. Okay, great. So if we look back at, let me have a look here. Yeah, if we look back at this incorporation, because I think this is critical as to why the government has decided to increase those shares, the tax on those shares. So in September 2024, we saw 5,312 new limited companies set up to hold buy-to-let properties across Great Britain. So I'm just going to jump straight into the meat of this, because this is going to be important to what I want to emphasize, which is 59 of these new companies have been set up in south of England, where higher interest rates have hit the hardest and where a larger share of households are higher rate taxpayers. It is these landlords who are most likely to benefit from incorporating. So what we do know again is that a lot of landlords have incorporated to be able to mitigate that Section 24 being introduced and that mortgage rise, of course. Now, here is the punchline. However, only 42% of properties bought by limited companies so far this year have been in the south of England. This highlights how many southern-based landlords are investing in the Midlands or north of England, where yields tend to be higher. And it's not only the yields, and this is the point I want to drive through. It's not only the yield; it is the cost of getting into the property industry, or being a landlord, the buy-to-let. And even if you're already in the buy-to-let industry, it is the cost of expanding. And that cost has increased substantially with that 3% surcharge just a few years ago, which is now gone up to 5%. So here in the capital, at least, you have, of course, a higher cost of properties. If you have a mortgage, those interest rates, of course, are higher. And to get into and purchase that property, that stamp duty has increased substantially. So again, that is a trend that I'm going to continue to see accelerating. So let's have a look here, an article by Landor today that dives into a little bit more in detail with regards to the budget announced today. So we've got stamp duty buy-to-let up from midnight. Bear with me a moment. Let me just bring this up here. Cool. So hopefully you can see this. So stamp duty buy-to-let from midnight. Chancellor Reeves, and we talked about that stamp duty increasing from 2%. Tell you what. So the stamp duty surcharge on additional homes, buy-to-let, and holiday properties will increase by 2% to 5% from midnight. Capital gain tax, as we already shared, this for non-residential assets will rise at its lowest rate from 10% to 18%. That's the lowest rate. But then the highest rate will be going up from 20 to 24%. But there will be no change to capital gain tax for residential property, which already has an 18% to 24% rate. And of course, that was one of the biggest fears from a lot of landlords who wanted to offload their properties. And in fact, if we look at the last couple of months, at least the media has put that this is the reason why a lot of landlords have kind of had this frenzy of putting their properties on the market for sale because they wanted to avoid any potential capital gain tax increase, which we've not seen today from that autumn budget. Instead, the government, of course, is focusing very specifically on the shares and increasing capital gain tax on not specifically on property. So the Conservative government inheritance tax threshold, frozen until 2028 by Rishi Sunak, will be extended to 2030. So that's an extra 2 years provided, and we don't know what's going to happen beyond that. It will remain the case that the first 325,000 of any estate can be inherited tax-free. Now, the bad news, by the way, that means nothing here in London because there are no properties that I know of, at least, or at least very few that are below £300,000. So the bad news directly applying to agents is the employer's national insurance. Of course, this is applying to businesses and agents and so forth. So rest of the budget at glance. Let's look at this. So freeze on income and national insurance thresholds to end in 2028, preventing people from being dragged into higher tax bands. Capital gains tax paid on profits from selling shares to increase from 20 to 24%. Of course, this is the higher rate tax bracket. The lower rate will go from 10 to 18%, which is almost double. That's a big jump. Freeze on inheritance tax thresholds extended beyond 2028 and 2020 and 2030, and then you've got the business taxes, which we already shared with you, of course. Workers earning above £5,000 in April, down from £9,100, the rate increasing from 13.8 to 15%. Housing, current affordable homes budget, which runs until 2026, boosted by £500 million. Social housing providers to be allowed to increase rents above inflation under a multi-year deal. Stamp duty surcharges we already shared with you, 3 to 5%. And then here goes the rest. So Again, there isn't a lot to share when it talks about housing specifically. But of course, it does impact sectors of the housing. And let's have a look here if there are any other questions, because there is a question here from Edmund before we do wrap up. If you just join in, we have shared, of course, with regards to the different policies and the tax changes that Labour government has introduced. For me, the biggest has to be that stamp duty surcharge increasing from 3 to 5%. So here we have Edmund, with the government raising taxes on landlords and second homeowners, do you think we'll see fewer rental properties in the long term, or will this balance demand for first-time buyers? Well, that is certainly the aim of the government. It's to level up the playing field for those first-time buyers. So if the plan works according to what the Labour government wants, then this pretty much is true, Edmund. It will be leveling up the first time buyers. However, as I said before, if this impacts the sales negatively, uh, quite a few landlords are in a position of saying, you know what, if I don't get the money that I want, then I'm just going to put my property back on the rent. Even though that, the whole regulation things have made me quite nervous, I'm just going to put my property back on rental. And there are quite a few landlords out there just sort of dipping their toes in the water and finding out to see if they can actually sell their property or not. So I think that, of course, this is like they a lot of landlords are cornered. If they sell, they're getting whammed with a stamp duty tax bill. Now, if they keep the property on rental, then they're being whacked with another type of tax, which, of course, if they're not incorporated, then they're going to have to muster that Section 24, which was faded in between 2017 and 2020, and those high mortgage rates. But a lot of landlords will make it work if they have to. If they're pushed and they're forced and they're cornered, they probably will put the property back on the market for rental. So if I was a betting man, I think the latter is exactly what would happen if prices are um, impacted negatively. But I would love to hear your views on this. Which way you think this is going to go? Do you think this is actually going to help more properties go onto the market and sell for more money, or do you think that actually there's going to be more supply because of this? More people wanted to sell their properties and therefore keep that price down, because naturally more supply does mean that it keeps prices in check. So, Leslie, Danny, do you think the higher cost for land will lead to even higher rents, especially in areas with a high rental demand? Well, I do believe, Leslie, that if rental properties, if the regulations are enough to scare quite a few landlords out there, and if we go by what we've seen the last couple of months, I think that is correct. Then that would mean that there's less supply, and less supply will keep those rental properties going up. Of course, let's keep in mind that we won't continue to see the boom that we've seen over the course of the last 2, 3 years. I mean, let's face it, we've seen double digit rent increases in the last 36 months. And whilst that may sound great, and it is to an extent for landlords at least, one thing to consider is that it's not sustainable. And the truth is, it's not sustainable for renters, but it's not sustainable for landlords either. So let me share with you what I mean by that. One of the biggest reasons that the government has interfered with the housing market is because it's not sustainable for the wider stakeholders involved in the rental sector. And this is why we're seeing that involvement, because those rent increases are simply not sustainable. But another thing to point out is those rent increases, they're not driven by landlords, they are driven by the market. And there are several factors for that. I mean, wages is number one. Inflation is two, but also the supply of homes, which isn't the responsibility of landlords. It is the responsibility, of course, of governments, and they have failed each and every time. I don't care whether it's Conservative or whether it's Labour. They have failed each and every time to deliver on their promises in providing housing And even more specifically, affordable housing is what is much more needed than what is in demand, especially when we look at the capital. It's the numbers that have been promised haven't been delivered, and what's happened with population here in the capital is increased. There was a point where it became stable. This is during the pandemic, but again, it's on the rise. And if we know anything about any city, is that the population, this is across the world, but population across the world in urban areas is increasing. Right now, half of the population lives in urban areas. And what we do know is going on to 2050, we know that population is going to increase by double. That is what a lot of data is suggesting, that population in these urban areas is going to double, which is why you see so many funds and banks and getting into the build to rent industry, and being able to, if you look across any city that has good connection into the capital, or where you have good infrastructure, we can see there is a lot of construction, and a lot of this construction does belong to these big banks. You've got Legal and General, you have Lloyd's going into the sector as well, John Lewis, of course, and then you have Nest, of course, which is the fund, and people becoming landlords by just association and don't even know it. And the government, of course, is giving a green light to this. And whether they're getting deals with regards to social housing and affordable housing within these constructions, I'm not exactly sure. But I do know that they're giving these big builders the green light to be able to proceed. I hope that this is helpful for a lot of people out there as to dynamics in the market and how one thing has a ripple effect on others. I mean, you interfere with the market, and naturally, this is what continues to happen. And again, if you're just jumping in, one of the impacts that we see happening is that trend to continue, which is a lot of buy-to-let investors looking up north, because this is where their numbers can work, not only from a yield point of view, but also from an initial investment point of view, with your stamp duty being much lower and the purchase of that property. Let's look at, we have another question here from Stephen James. With increased costs from stamp duty and potential tax changes, what alternative investment options might landlords consider if buy-to-let becomes less viable? That's a great question. I'm going to share something with you, which is so first off, I'm not going to advise on that. I'm not a financial advisor, and it will be completely irresponsible for me to share that with you, Stephen. In fact, if you find out yourself, please let me know, because I benefit from that advice as well, as to what other investment would be similar, or at least attractive, if it's not property. But I wanted to share this with you. So thank you for asking that. So despite the new regulations and everything that's happened, Paragon Bank made a very interesting survey, and this was August, September, October, so almost a couple of months ago. And as we can see, this survey, it says that it seems to lift the lid on why land remain the buy-to-let market, despite the tax and regulatory controls now making the sector so much more challenging. So Paragon Bank surveyed 500 landlords with up to 3 properties and with declared ambitions to build a larger portfolio. And that's the point, guys, that there are landlords who are exiting the market. They are very specific. What we do know is that there are landlords who have become accidental landlords. And what does this mean? It means landlords who, for whatever reason, inherited a property, dare I say it, divorced, and ended up with a property upsized, and was at the right time to sell the initial property that they had. So these are accidental landlords that don't want to run having a property as a business, and that's what these are the landlords that we see that are exiting the market. But those professional landlords that we call are the landlords who continue to stay in the market, and these typically have more than 3 properties. So if we look at this here as to why landlords are continuing to stay in the market despite these tax changes, is number one, long-term rental demand. 6 in 10 landlords, that's 60%, cited the ongoing demand for rental properties as a key factor in their decision to grow their portfolios. Retirement income. Over half of landlords, 54%, are looking to add properties to their portfolio as a means of supplement to their retirement. Capital appreciation, and this is the big one, because if you know anything about property, it usually hits 3 buckets, or at least it should. The first one is that the tenant pays the debt for you. Okay. Number 2, it's that the cash flow it provides to you from day one. And of course, this can be somewhat more challenging in today's market because of the mortgage rate, but still, it should provide you with a cash flow. That's bucket number 2. And then bucket number 3, and this is the biggest one, and this is where you win at property long term. And this is going to be the capital appreciation. So nearly half of respondents believe that long-term house price growth is a significant driver for their investment decisions. And then last and certainly not least is going to be the preference for a property. So over a third of landlords, 34%, prefer property as an investment over other options. So this is Louisa Sedgwick from Paragon Bank. The rental market is set for continued growth, driven by projected population increase of around 10% over the next decade. This favorable market outlook is underpinning the investment decision of aspiring landlords. And again, it's not only landlords that it's attracting international funds, investment funds. Again, the likes of Nest has gone into the build to rent market. I mean, you have Lloyds Bank, as I said before. You've got John Lewis, retailer, insurance companies, general, legal and general, and so forth. So, of course, this is a demand that continues. So the research also demonstrates a clear focus on long-term planning, with over half of landlords building portfolios to support their retirement. This indicates a strong commitment to the rental sector and is essential for the overall health of the private sector. The Paragon Bank study also sheds light on the factors that influence landlords' decisions. So, of course, friends and family played a significant role, with 43% citing as primary motivation. A large proportion of landlords, 39%, started renting out their first property by accident. So this is what I was talking about. That's 39% of landlords. 39% of landlords started their property journey by accident, by inheriting, or by a divorce. So these are the landlords that I see, at least, that are majority when it comes to selling. So listen, guys, I hope that this is being helpful, especially as we've had that budget come in over the course of the afternoon, and we will be keeping an eye on this. But if you are joining and you want to watch the recording of this, we have looked at the impact of that stamp duty surcharge increasing from 3 to 5% for second homes, and looking at the other aspects of the budget to this afternoon that's going to impact a lot of landlords across the country. And of course, the unintended consequences just on the overall sales market as well, which is going to be interesting, especially as we enter into winter in the next few weeks, as to what's going to happen. And I guess one question that's asked a lot by landlords is, Danny, is right now a good time to sell, or should I wait until 2025 springtime? Will I get more money? And what I'll say is, subscribe to the channel, because that's certainly a video that we're going to put out there. If you are a landlord and wanted to offload some of your properties, just give us a shout. Someone also asked me with properties in the capital, saying, given that we're getting more yields in the north, should we sell a couple of our properties that we have here in the capital to purchase more out there? And my advice on that is, I guess it depends on what your specific situation is. It's a very challenging one. And just because I've been asked by several landlords, the answer would probably be no, because of the cost involved in selling the properties, and then having to purchase. That cost has increased as well, then having to purchase up in the north with the stamp duty hike. So that just wouldn't make any sense. You're probably better off refinancing. And then if you want to expand on your property portfolio, then use that money to purchase more properties. The truth is that unless you purchase the property here in the capital in a in a very bad area, the truth is you're better off just holding on to that property long term. But again, your situation may be different, so I don't know. So listen, guys, thank you so much for joining me this evening. We are wrapping up now. We're usually on for an hour, but it's quite late now, and I'm way past my bedtime. Thank you very much appreciated, and I hope to catch up with you guys next week live every Wednesday between 6:30 and 7:30. We were running slightly late this time round.